so that so that we can start. And for clarity of transmission, I'll hit the mute button, though, as always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself and throw them out there, or you can put them in the chat. The bracha for Torah is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitanu v'tzivanu v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And there's there are there's a lot going on in the world now, and some of it could be seen as more important, or at least differently important than studying Talmud. I'm tempted to. My guess is people process all of the events going on in their own way. I'm tempted to stick with studying this stuff. Partly for what I've mentioned before, that in order to process all of the other events that are going on in the world, like letting our minds exercise a different way, is in itself useful. And ultimately, my transition is that, like, this stuff is about like figuring out how to have a community bound together by rules, which is part of the subtext of a lot of things going on in our world today. So with that, we have made our way to, I think we left off at the, we're on page 4a of the Gemara, which we finished, I think, or just about finished, page 19 in the Koren Steinsaltz. I don't know where the paragraph number in the if you're looking at in Sfaria, you go to Talmud and then Zarim Brachot, and for a let's see, I usually try to write this down, but I didn't. 3b 4a for a paragraph number 11, if you're looking online. Now, last time we saw a side of King David that you might not have seen before. It started out normal enough, like, David getting up at midnight and singing psalms and saying, like, am I not, is this not pious enough for you, O Lord, that I get up at midnight and sing songs on my lyre, and like that sort of David as poet and musician, familiar. Then we got David asks, am I not pious? Not just because of that, but because he as king, and the role of king as decision maker, would involve himself in the most intimate decisions that amongst the people of Israel, which is to say issues of what are now called Taharat Mishpacha, the laws of family purity. Specifically, when a woman is bleeding, what type of bleeding is it, and right down to issues of surrounding births and stillbirths. It's different side of David. Anyway, his point is, like, the rabbis are trying to figure out, why is David saying, am I not, I am pious? And they sort of like, what makes somebody pious? For a king, it would be this. Notice, like, that role of king as person to whom people bring their questions. That is a familiar scene from David's son, Solomon, right? Solomon's most famous scene is deciding sort of this intimate-ish question between two women and splitting the baby. Here's David, also people bring their problems to him. That. Um, the And then the bottom, the next section is a mention that David would go to his Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, for and consult him in matters of halacha. And this is just sort of imagining a world. Mephibosheth is in David's court, right? David sort of, it seems that maybe as an object of pity or as a expression of, if you want to be kind to David, expression of loyalty to his fallen beloved friend, looks after Jonathan's son Mephibosheth. Or if you want to be cynical about David, you keep your friends close, your enemies closer. And since Mephibosheth would have a claim on the throne, he keeps him nearby to make sure that he is kept an eye on and not out scheming. Or if you want to just have a just basic human view of it, Mephibosheth is crippled. He can't. It's not exactly clear. He seems he can't walk normally, or maybe under his own power, his legs were crushed as a youth. So it could just be a charity, an act of tzedakah. But to the rabbis, he's a halachic advisor. He needs to have a role, and his role is halachic advisor. Baruch Hashem. Many of us read the stories of David together, and nobody said, "Hey, Mephibosheth, he seems like he'd be David's halachic advisor." But so there's a gap sometimes between the midrash and what you get in the regular text. And then there's a slight debate about what his name is. Is he called different things? Because there are different. Sometimes there's a reference to different people, and the rabbis want to harmonize the names. Ask his different names. For those of you who study Esther with me, you saw this morning the rabbis think that Haman, Bu, is also Memuchan. They think that the evil advisor who recommends Vashti's death in chapter 1 is the same evil advisor who will recommend the Jews' death later on. This guy's always thinking about killing people. So a lot of times named, or even in the last week's Torah portion, Moses has a father-in-law who goes by a few different names. Sometimes the father-in-law is called Ruel, sometimes he's called Yitro, sometimes he's called Chovav, different names. And now we're having the same thing. Mephibosheth, is he Ishbosheth or is he Kilav? Or is he Daniel? And then there's a sort of, they have a little debate there, but I'm going to skip over their little debate. I want to get to page 20 at the top. This is, it begins Ve'elav Amar, and if you're looking in the Steinsaltz, it is paragraph number 13. And they're going to, and they're talking about this reference to Kilav, who they're sort of arguing about, is this the same guy as Mephibosheth? They're on a bit of a tangent. And I want to zip over this part relatively quickly. It says, Solomon in his wisdom wrote, right, because Proverbs is traditionally attributed to King Solomon. This is the rabbis take seriously the attributions. So as I said, like if you wanted to think about it realistically, it's more likely that when it says like when there are biblical attributions, it means, this is written by a scribe in the court of so-and-so. It's not the actual guy, but tradition reads as the actual guy. Solomon says in Proverbs, Bani, im racham livecha yismach libi gamani. In Proverbs, it says, my son, if your heart is wise, my heart will be glad, even mine. So just their commentary there is that just as David enjoyed witnessing his son Kilav develop into a Torah luminary to the extent that Kilav was able to respond to Mephibosheth, because the previous process was that David's son Kilav you don't meet in the book of Samuel. He's in a genealogy in the book of Chronicles. So they imagine sort of Torah discussions between them. Solomon is happy to see a wise-hearted son, and they say Solomon says about Kilav. This is again reach Chacham b'ni v'samach libi v'eshkach chofri davar. Be wise, my son, and make my heart glad, that I may respond to those who taunt me. Who this is that they were arguing about halacha. This time to skip over. It doesn't matter if you don't understand it. This is the part I wanted to get to, and I'm because Alan Halpern is here. But David, in the next paragraph, Mikra Nafshe Chasid. David, did David really call himself pious? Right? If you remember from the previous page, there's this reference in the Psalms where David says, "Ki chasidani." We had an argument about this. Like, what David in Psalm 86 says, "Keep my soul pure." Ki chasidani, because I'm a chasid, I'm a pious guy, and there's a sort of weird thing. It's like, wait a minute, there's one, like, how can you claim you're pious? It's like claiming that you're humble. Like, once you say it, are you really it? But their question is almost like, wait a minute, David, he's awesome. David is beloved of God. David does all of these mitzvahs. Could David has wondered whether or not he was pious enough for God? Also, he's a prophet. He speaks with God. God and David like have a relationship. Like, how could he not know? So one thing here, did David really call himself pious? They're asking. Vikati. Not only does he call himself pious, we have this other verse in the Psalms from Psalm 27. Psalm 27, by the way, as the Psalm for the season of Tshuva. Psalm 27 is the one that we read from the beginning of Elul to the end of Hoshana Rabbah, like that one that we had in the fall. Hopefully we'll be in person when we say it this coming fall. They're going to quote from that one. So, isn't it also written in that Psalm 27 that says, Lulei hamanti l'rot b'tuv Adonai be'eretz chaim? You remember this, it's the end of the Psalm, so we say it out loud in Hebrew. If I had not, Lulei, believed to look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. That's sort of an awkward translation they give there. Lulei has a sense of like if or maybe. I wonder how they translate it in Lev Shalom. But Lulei is a, here we are, Psalm 27. If only I could trust that I would see God's goodness in the land of the living, is how Lev Shalom translates that line. I'm going to slow down and say it. Lulei ha'amanti l'rot b'tuv Adonai be'eretz chaim. If only I could trust that I would see God's goodness in the land of the living. What's David saying here? David is saying, I hope, and then the next line, of course, be strong, place your hope in Adonai, be strong, take courage, and place your hope in Adonai. David is saying, Lulei hamanti, if only I could trust that I will benefit from God's goodness, which they read sort of as olam haba, or that you're worthy of God's blessing. David's saying, if only I could believe that I was worthy of it. And so their question is, wait a minute, over here, Psalm 86, you're saying, ki chasidani, I am pious. Here, Psalm 27, you're saying, if only I could believe that I was good enough. They're like, what's up? We have a contradiction, right? So is David confident, ki chasidani, I'm pious? Or is he doubtful, lulei hamanti, if only I could know? Lulei is like a word indicating doubt. There's no like one word English translation for it. It's like if only. And in a Tanakh, in a printed full Tanakh, there are dots above the word lulei. This like if only word. And the reason I say that, Alan, is that every when we encounter moments in the Torah when there are dots above the letters, I think most commonly Linda will say, why are there dots above the letters? Here finally, and I always have to scramble to think of something. Here finally, there are dots above the letters, and this is where the Talmud is going to say, like, hey, why are there dots above the letters? So this is a question that commonly comes up. and you notice here in the text, the dots that appear, this is the commentary, over the word lule in the text of the Tanakh, indicate doubt and uncertainty of his piety and whether he was deserving of a place in the land of the living, whether or not that's in this world or the next, I would say. They reference Avot de Rabbi Natan there. And you see, if you're looking in if you have a copy of the Koran book, they sort of helpfully have like a little note on the side or a big picture of, hard to hold the book, like this. I have a picture of like what it looks like, meaning that the word lule in a full Hebrew printed Tanakh would have a dots above the lamed, both lameds and the aleph, and not part of the, they're not vowels, and they predate the vowels, which is to say, all the vowels that we are used to seeing in Hebrew texts are later creations. They are post-Talmudic, they're post-biblical, post-Talmudic. They're about 1,000 years old from the Masoretes. They didn't have all of those dots, but these dots that they're talking about, they did have. These dots are even in unvowelized text. The 50-cent word for those little things are diacritical marks, right? That's the English of them. That's nikud. So the side note in the Koran edition is that the left column is that these dots appear over certain words throughout the Torah and the Tanakh, which as a rule is without punctuation or vocalization. Whenever they appear, these dots indicate that further investigation and exposition is necessary. Usually they indicate a caveat regarding the simple understanding of the word or phrase, calling it into question or raising some uncertainty about it. So that's always like the unsatisfying answer when people will raise their hand in shul and say like, why are there dots above this word? Like you see it right there. It's like, that is sort of like a shrug. It's like, oh, that means you're supposed to investigate that more deeply, which is sort of a semi not helpful comment. So notice that there are dots above it, which means that there's some other meaning going on. Now, if you want to be a critical scholar about it, you would say that sometimes the dots indicate that the sofer, that the scribe, didn't know if there was an issue with this word or not. So sometimes it appears over words that maybe the sofer am I copying off an accurate copy? Should this word really be here? Or is this correct or is this not correct? Or it could sometimes indicate that at some point in time there was a problem with the text. But that's a heretical modern university style theory to the dots. The rabbis, of course, won't give that. The rabbis will say that it indicates that you're supposed that there's a deeper meaning to this word, and what they're putting out here is that, oh, this indicates David's deep internal doubts. David has moments where he's like, yes, I'm doing enough mitzvot, I am pious. And then this line, the dots sort of like highlight it, being like, if only I could be confident enough that I was doing enough to see God.
Rabbi, Sim Shalom is, mine is the faith that I will surely see the Lord's goodness in the land of the living. So it's almost like
the opposite.
He's looking for a goal, and he prays that that everybody's going to become pious, not just.
I don't love that. I mean, with all due humility, I don't love that Sim Shalom translation. I like I think the Lev Shalom is closer to the mark. I'm going to check Robert Alter's. but somebody else had a wow, altar really sort of like makes it something of a mouthful. He says, if I but trust to see the Lord's goodness in the land of the living, hope for the Lord, let your heart be firm and bold, and hope for the Lord. If I but trust to see the Lord's goodness in the land of the living. And his note on that is, this sentence, at least in the textual form passed down to us, seems to be an ellipsis. Meaning that it's sort of, ellipsis, that it's like a parenthetical sentence as part of the larger psalm. If I but trust to see the Lord's goodness. It's a little, that is somewhere between the Sim Shalom, which has a little bit more confident feel, and the Love Shalom, which is more inquiring. Others?
Well, I just had a more of a general question before we, we just as an aside, were there texts that are pre-dot? When did the dots come into play? Who did these dots? Are the dots consistent amongst all texts? Or are the Sofers inconsistent? Do some words have dots and some not? Is there consistency now? Was there a time where the dots were just coming into play and some of the dotted words were in some texts by some Sofers and not others? What was the origin, I guess?
To my knowledge, there are not pre-dot texts to my knowledge, and to my knowledge, they are consistent across, meaning that if you that you'll find them sort of like across the board. And I suppose the only place, and there are Masoretic notes on most of them, like the meaning that because like in every certain printed edition I see, like there's a note of like, this is always there. The one place where one could look for dissent on this would be in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I don't know the answer to that question, meaning that in there are there copies of biblical books without the nikud, the dots that we would expect, though because they only come up every so often, and because the Dead Sea Scrolls aren't complete.
Right.
So it may not even come up, but that would be the place to look. Though again, even there, you could you'd say that, well, this is just a variant text, but sort of like but certainly for the past 1,000 years, and they seem to be pretty confident in it from longer than that ago, that these have dots, because they're saying, I mean the Talmud is saying this. I mean, this at least seems to be somewhere, like 1,600 years ago that they're having this conversation.
Okay. So it's been a long time.
Yes. This is not, which already is, it was a long time, but which is that same number of years after King David. But they're assuming the dots are very much a part of the text. They don't seem to be envisioning a version of the text where those dots aren't above Lulay.
Right. They're not calling the dots into question at all. So it's got to go way back before Talmud times.
Yes, exactly. They're accepting it.
Right.
And that's the very next line. The Vatane Mishmei the Rabbi Yossi is taught in the name of Rabbi Yossi. It's taught in the Tosefta. The Tosefta again is from the same era as the Mishnah. It's just the part that don't come in. Lama Nikuda Lule. Why are there dots? Why are there Nikud above the word Lule? Like as if there's some question question about the text. They put in, why? Amar David lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rebbeinu Shel Olam, Yivtoach ani vach, שאתה משלם שכר טוב לצדיקים לעתיד לבוא, אבל איני יודע אם יש לי חלק ביניהם, אם לא. Why are there dots there? Because in that moment, David is saying before Kadosh Baruch Hu, before the Holy One, blessed be God, says, Ribbono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, I have every confidence that you grant an excellent reward to the righteous in the world to come. I'm confident, I'm sure, I have assurance that you will pay sachar tov, right? That you'll give good reward. You're relied upon to pay out to tzadikim, to the righteous, latid lavo, in the future to come. Aval, but I don't know if I have a portion among them or not. So the lule, he says, why there are dots above lule? And again, so he's speaking the 2nd century, and he's confident that everyone's copy has dots. That's his way of saying, God, I know you're good for all of your promises. I just don't know if I've earned it yet. Like, so to him, the dots are almost like a bold or an italics of like where he's saying, if only I could believe. The Lev Shalom translation that I said a moment ago, if only I could trust, they're translating, I would say, according to Rabbi Yossi here. Every translator makes his own or her own decisions and how to shade the text one way or the other. And we can probably say with some confidence that whoever did the translating for this page in the Lev Shalom read this Gemara and decided to go with Rabbi Yossi, that this indicates doubt. Shama Yerum Chatat. The full commentary on that next little piece there, as the Gemara responds, is he was concerned does not prove anything. King David knew he was pious. He was simply concerned lest a transgression they might commit in the future will cause him to lose his opportunity. So they're saying David knew he was pious. This is the comeback to Rabbi Yossi. David knew he was pious. That's why he says Ki Chasidani. He knows he's a good guy. He knows he should get the world to come. He just doesn't know in the future. In the future, I conceivably could make a mistake. Up till now, I haven't made any mistakes worthy of being considered that I'm a bad guy. And obviously, you can point out that David made lots of mistakes in his youth, even. So, like, by the time he would have been saying this stuff, he just says that I know nothing in the future is guaranteed. So he both knows he is pious, but knows that past results aren't necessarily indicative, don't guarantee future returns. Right. And then go ahead.
As you pointed out a few times, the picture of David that we see here is certainly not in Kings. So are there a lot of other writings that we don't have, or whom are they? What are they looking at when they're talking about David?
Who's this David that they're who's this David that the David we know is always on the make? He's secretly plotting how other people will have, his enemies will have accidents and die. He's both a womanizer and cruel to the women in his life. He seems to have disregard for human life and a number of things, and he's a brigand. And so where's this super pious David who gets up at midnight to study Torah and first thing in the morning is arguing halacha and dealing with women's afterbirth? Like it's like how, like where's this David coming from? The answer is David is a tzaddik. He's a great guy. So it's almost just like legends built around like around the founders, right? Like we make heroes out of everyone, you know, and we can build up Washington or Jefferson or whoever our heroes might be, and you know, just like Mickey Mantle might not have been the you know, pure boyhood idol that he might have been sold as to America's youth at one point in time, or Babe Ruth, so too King David. um, but yeah, so Laura, point well taken. The Tanakh, he's got an edge, and here he's Mr. Clean.
But I mean, they're talking about things that have risen. You know, I mean, are they reading other texts that we don't have anymore? Or?
No, they're not reading it. They don't have anything that we don't have anymore, like in terms of this stuff. It's almost like like partly it's the Psalms, because so many of the Psalms, like, so if we're really going to play this out, like, because the Psalms are le David, to David, and the Psalms often will picture a pious good soul. So if David is that pious good soul, then that's David. And sure, we read these other narrative sections where he made a few mistakes along the way. Nobody's perfect. That the spiritual heights and pathos of the Psalms are where they're grounding this view of pious David in. And then they sort of you have to make like the other parts of the story fit, but that's where pious David comes from. And that, again, you know who wins, because again, we read together all these stories of like David, you know, committing adultery and stuff like this. And we still will go off and sing David Melech Israel, right? Like he's just both. And God loves him. And God, you know, isn't throwing around God's love randomly, so he must be worthy. So we do the same. Then the next, they're going to talk about the same sort of thing, and we'll zip through this relatively quickly. They do the same with Jacob. And of course, we do the traditional same thing with Jacob, right? Jacob in that Torah text is something of a jerk, right? And a trickster and a deceiver, and not an ideal human being. But of course, Jacob in the tradition is a wonderful patriarch. So same thing happens there too. Yaakov bar Abba, so Ba'idi. What's this like? This is like, it's like, we have a quote from Rabbi Yaakov Baridi, the Rabbi Yaakov Baridi Rami. He raised a contradiction between two different passages. Ketiv, v'hine Elochi imach v'shmarticha b'chol asher telech. It's written that that in the dream of Jacob's ladder, God says to Jacob, behold, I'm with you and I'll guard you wherever you go, right? God promises Jacob in the ladder dream. V'chativ, and it's also written, it's written later on when he's coming back to face down with Esav, and Esav is coming out with 400 men, and Yaakov doesn't have an army with him, and he knows that, you know, that Esav swore that he was going to kill him, says that Jacob was very afraid. So wait a minute, if God promised Jacob that God would be with him, and Jacob was afraid, what's up with that? Did Jacob not remember the dream of the ladder? This was a key moment. How could he not know, Jacob, that God said, I'll be with you? Why would he be afraid? Well, the answer is Amar Shema Yergum Chatat. Well, lest I committed a sin. committed a transgression, meaning Jacob's like, oh, I know that when I had the latter dream, that that God said he would always be with me. But that was 20 years ago by the time he faced down with Esau. That was 20 years ago. In the meantime, I may have done something so terrible that God's like, the fine print of the contract has a morals clause in it, and I can cancel the contract. This is, this is like the contract for the, I don't know, for the carousel in Central Park. The that you can have that there can be an out clause. I don't know if there is or not, but like contracts can have moral out clauses. Certainly for I don't know, if you're in a if I have a contract to be a spokesperson for Disney World, there's definitely a morals clause, right? Like they promised to pay me X amount of money to advertise Disney World, but if I'm caught doing the wrong thing, then they can break the contract. Or all endorsement deals have this, right? Like if you get caught doing or saying the wrong thing, your shoe contract can be broken. Nike will drop you. The Tiger Woods ran into this. I don't think it's Nike though, but with other contracts, right? Like this happens, right? So Jacob's saying that. Jacob knows he's a pious guy, knows God made him a promise, but also knows, don't assume that that's good for all. That's not a get out of jail free card. You can still do something to mess that up. There is a morals clause to God's promises, just like with your Disney World endorsement deal. So by the way, notice how they're addressing, so maybe strangely, maybe creatively, but they're addressing like a problematic theological aspects of the biblical text. Wait a minute. When God makes a promise, does that mean that you get it for all time and you don't have to behave the right way anymore? And they're answering it, no, that's not the case. God's saying that, like, sort of follow through on your end and I'll keep mine, but it's not a one-way deal. God's promises aren't fixed and unchanging. They're dependent on you continuing to be a decent person, and you can't do terrible things and expect God to honor that contract. There is, even if there's not like fine print in the Torah, there's an implied morals clause to all this stuff.
But the meeting between Jacob and Esau ended up peaceful. So
right, but Jacob
wasn't God, wasn't he sort of, indirectly protecting Jacob?
So you could say that, but their point is, in the moment when Jacob is afraid before the meeting, that's the moment that we're concerned with. Jacob doesn't know it's going to turn out well in the end, even though we, the readers, do. Jacob's afraid. So their question is, why is he afraid? And when he had been assured, answer, he knows the assurance is not a guaranteed assurance, right? If it were 5 minutes ago, God said, I'll take care of you, then great. But it was 20 years ago, and maybe I slipped up in between.
Rabbi, the Hertz Siddur says for that I should despair unless I believed that to see God's goodness in the land of the living.
Even more pronounced. You would not think that was the same as the Sim Shalom, right? But that's almost the opposite of the Sim Shalom. All right, now that you're on that, I'm grabbing out scroll. Yeah. I mean, so what can I tell you other than it shows that it's not all that, you can, if you read the rest of the psalm, it might be exactly the same, right? But occasionally there are lines that are that.
Well, the second thing is the next line is wait for the Lord. And their footnote for that is the psalmist's faith rebukes his faintness.
Yeah, the faith rebukes his faintness. I can't find the scroll here. Had I not trusted that I would see the goodness of Hashem in the land of life, had I not trusted. The meaning of this explanation is implied. If not for my faith, such false witnesses. So they want to. They know what it means, but they're trying to read it the opposite way to make David more confident. This is to Laura's point, to make David into the tzaddik. Yeah. So funny how it works both ways. And our school obviously does that with biblical characters, but you see that they're well grounded in doing so in the tradition. The Talmud here at least is giving David, all sorts of points that we might not give him, and also to Jacob. Jacob famously will be is uber confident, and in between those two events says God, if you protect me, then you will be my God. And like it's not it. Jacob always seems to be on the make and even trying to cut deals with God. So, yeah.
It's just so fascinating that all of these fathers that we think about all have faults, all have warts, and some of them very big ones. And yet they consider themselves pious. Excuse me.
Right.
And we look up to them. We find the good in them.
So right. Now, I would say that part of there's a few takeaways from that. One is know both the sort of like pie in the sky, sanitized version of perfect David, perfect Jacob, perfect Abraham. And it's worth like reading the text themselves and knowing Abraham pimped out his wife so that she could be raped by Pharaoh, and Jacob seemed to be interested in what was good for Jacob, and was willing to lie and such. And David, killed off, or had Uriah killed so that he could so he wouldn't get caught having impregnated his wife that he committed adultery with while he had sent him out to war, right? So David, so sort of both at once. You should know both and know that we all do that. We do it with people we love. With people who we love, we you shouldn't do it for the sins that I just named, but we overlook the faults of people who we love or who we want on our side. Nations do it with their heroes, and we should know both. Meaning, you have to keep both in mind, and you also have to know that if you're looking for someone perfect, you're not going to find them. It really is a question of which sins and how many sins put you over the top. The question isn't, does somebody contradict themselves or do the wrong thing? They do. The question is it's amounts and how much. And that's part of the applied to our current crises. It's not does somebody lie or does somebody say the wrong thing. It's sort of like how much or how or in what contexts or to what harm and things like that. It's not about that somebody has to be perfect or always say the right thing, because that's nonsense. And that's part of the issue with the internet, is that you can say the wrong thing and it's out there forever online and it can be chopped up and things like that. Those little was caught saying the wrong thing, terrible standard to use. There's a big picture thing here, and maybe David, on balance good, maybe on balance pious, I don't know.
Rabbi, I think that's one of maybe the important difference between the Jewish religion and some other religions, who actually posit a perfect God or man or whatever, and we don't. I mean, not God, but I mean people. And they are all people. Jesus is a person. And Muhammad is a person.
Right. Right, but you see that is a thing, right? Sort of famously, like none of us would there's a strand of it in the Jewish tradition that we keep citing, that we're talking about here, of trying to make David into a saint, but we got too much on him. We can't do it, right? Or at art school, I was trying to make David into a saint, or Moses, or Jacob, but it's hard to do. Right, as opposed to like that you can't mock or things like this. It is a different thing. And these folks are manifestly imperfect, despite the good PR work that the Chazal, that the sages of blessed memory are doing here. Let's finish up this thought. Like the next little bit here will sort of continue with the idea of like, wait a minute, are God's guarantees really provisional? Because that's somewhat concerning. Kanita. This is again something we say every morning. It's from the Song at the Sea, from Shemot 15, Parsha 2 weeks from now. When the people cross over, says, until your people will cross, Lord, until your people have acquired, the people you have acquired will cross. You'll bring them and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, the Lord, which you made for your dwelling, which is twice in the Song at the Sea at the end of it. It says that your people will cross the sea, and the implication is gain a reward. So why does it say twice? One of the rules is it doesn't repeat randomly, even here where it's a poem, and you'd say that could just be part of the poetic structure to repeat the phrase. It says Ad Ya'avoramcha Nai, that when it says until, Lord, your people will cross, refers to the first entry into Eretz Israel, into the land of Israel. In other words, Joshua leads the people in after the death of Moses. That's the Via Rishonah, the first coming in. Ad Yavor Amzu Kanita. And the second time that in the Song of the Sea, when it says, until the people you have acquired, God has acquired, cross, God, we're the property of Pharaoh as slaves, and then God like acquires us, right? God brings us out and we're free, but we're also sort of in debt to the one who sprung us, who posted our bail. That's the second coming into the land of Israel. In other words, we came in the land of Israel twice. There's first time with Joshua, second time with Ezra after the Babylonian exile. But the two references are in the same verse that takes place way before that. Now, if you want to problematize this and say that, wait a minute, how could the exiles walking across the sea at the Red Sea, why are they singing about coming back from the Babylonian exile? Ruach HaKodesh, they had that this is divinely, this is from God. The Torah has references all over, so don't hit me with the historical note that happened, 800 years after they crossed the sea. I know it. Not concerned. Sages said, Mikan Amru Chachamim, sages says, Rim hayu Yisrael asot lehem nes b'yamei Ezra, kaderech shenaseh lehem b'yamei Yoshua ben Nun, eile segaram chata. So that, you know what? Just like when they cross over, they say this crossing the sea, right? They merited having the sea split for them to escape Pharaoh. The Exodus generation did. God gifts them with the miracle of the splitting sea. Now, when Joshua leads them in to the land of Israel, what happens? Joshua splits the river. I know, you've been to the land of Israel. Splitting the river Jordan doesn't seem like a big deal. There was more water then, and it was a bigger deal. So they're crossing, and they're like, thank you, God, for letting us cross. They say it once at the They say it while they're going through the sea. And they say, thank you, God, for bringing us through. Thank you, God, for bringing us through. The twice refers to once you're going to bring us through in the future with Joshua. You will let Joshua split the river Jordan and our armies will march through. And again, the next time we come into the land, you'll do it again. So again, in the future, after the Babylonian exile, after the destruction of the first temple, and they come back to build the second temple, they come back and they have to come back the same way. They have to cross the river Jordan because they're coming from the east. But we don't read of the sea splitting there. So they're saying, you know what? God was going to split the sea for them coming into the land, but they blew it. They had too many sins on their record. God in the Song of the Sea was promising, you will come in the second time the way you came in the first time. In other words, with the water splitting. But you know what? You blew it. You don't deserve it anymore. I'm not doing it for you. No more. So in other words, here they learn again, God's promise, like Tiger's endorsement deals, conditional. All right. Now this is, again, you and I, some of you I have like sat there and said the Song of the Sea with 1,000 times. And never did we like pick up on this little like, oh, wow, it repeats that twice. I wonder what it's referring to. But that's the way the tradition reads it. We, with some of you, I've read that Psalm 27 1,000 times and never were like, David really seems to be a lot less confident here than he does elsewhere. Like, but this is part of it. Like, this is part of what makes the tradition rich, which is that it's not really limited to what's between the two covers of the book. They really, they sort of literally bring it alive, and they're trying to wring every possible meaning out of what's there. What's next is going to be, without any fanfare, a return to the Shema. I don't know if we've talked about the Shema for a month or two. But the very next line is 100% about lying down and rising up, and they'll stay there for a little while. So we've been on a long tangent for weeks and weeks and weeks. But now we are going to come back to the Shema. And God willing, we'll do it next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Docs, remember, tell Melinda that we addressed the dot issue. And tomorrow night, 7 o'clock for Kabbalat Shabbat, 8:45 in the morning for our vote on Saturday, and 9:30 for Tefillah. You guys should be well. Take care of yourselves.
Yes, likewise. You too. Thank you.
In the midst of all the political madness,